Hey, and welcome back to Superhero Speak. I am your host, Dave. And so, first off, I want to say that we're trying to get back to recording more videos for the channel as opposed to just doing the live show and putting up clips, which is what we've been doing for a little while now. I'm back to putting up at least rants. This is one of them on Fridays. And going forward, we're going to try to put out 2 to 3 videos a week. We're going to try to get back to comic book reviews. With all that being said, let's get into it. And the question I'm asking this week is who's really responsible for creating a character? And nowhere have I seen this question debated more than in the comic book industry. It comes down to, is it the writer or the artist who first draws the character? And I find it fascinating because one time I did ask somebody who gave me an answer. No one else, because you ask people, why do we debate this? And people are like, oh, I don't know. I guess because the artist needs recognition, whatever. The only half intelligent answer I ever got on this was because comic books are a visual medium, but so are movies. So I've always often wondered why we don't give credit to the concept artists who create the looks of a lot of these characters as creating the character. Let me start off with the most famous example, Darth Vader, right? If you ask anyone on the planet who invented Darth Vader, who came up with Darth Vader, they will say George Lucas, of course, right? He created Star Wars, he created all the characters in that universe, he created Darth Vader. However, Ralph Mc Ralph McGuire, the very famous concept artist who worked on the Star Wars movies, is the first person who created a concept sketch of Darth Vader. And in that sketch, he's the one who gave Vader a cape and created his iconic mask, which a lot of people will argue that is what makes Darth Vader. However, again, we never give Ralph the credit for creating the character. It always goes to George Lucas. And I'm not arguing that. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying it's fascinating that we don't do it with movies. Another example that I can think of where we don't argue is books, right? Obviously, books aren't a visual medium. If you were going to say who created Bilbo Baggins, of course, everyone's going to say J.R.R. Tolkien. However, in 1977, Rankin and Bass created the first movie to use the character, the Hobbit movie, the animated, very famous animated movie. If you're from my generation, you know exactly what it is. And Lester Adams is the artist who created the first concept sketch of what Bilbo Baggins would look like in this movie. Lester Adams obviously doesn't get any credit for creating Bilbo Baggins. He's in the book, he's described in the book of what he looks like, and Mr. Adams basically created that image for the cartoon based on the description in the book. So there's a visual medium being based on a book. Yes, you always will say Tolkien created Bilbo Baggins and all of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit characters. So how did it get so messed up in comics? Why is there an argument between writer and artist and who created a character? Now let's look at some of the most famous examples of this happening in comics and try to get to the bottom of it. We'll start obviously with the most famous character, I think, that this has been debated for a long time, and that's Batman. Batman, of course, was created by Bob Kane, and he created the character. He was an artist. He came up with the concept, drew the character, and then shopped it around. And when DC decided they were going to create the book, he worked with writer Bill Finger, and I believe it's Detective Comics 28. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is our first introduction to Batman. However, Bob Kane's original concept, Batman wore a domino mask, like a lot of the superheroes of that time, of the 30s and 40s, wore a bright red costume and had blonde hair. So he looked very different than the Batman today. Bill Finger was the one that said, "Oh, let's put him in a cowl, to hide his face more, and have him more look like a bat." Darkened the colors, made the black and gray costume that we know today as Batman. And he also created the supporting characters. He came up with Commissioner Gordon, Robin, of course, Penguin, Joker, Riddler, a lot of the rogues gallery, the villains. He built the world of Gotham City and Batman and the characters. But for a long time, Bob Kane got sole credit for creating Batman because he came up with the concepts. But Bill Finger created the character today. So it becomes a murky area. And they do nowadays, for most of the time, when they say who created Batman, they will say Bob Kane and Bill Finger. It was a collaboration, which I think you're going to find as you go through these characters and you think about it, it is a collaboration in a lot of ways. I'm still debating this in my head. Who's truly responsible? Again, I think the Batman one is very murky because if Bob Kane had just gone with his concept and didn't Bill Finger didn't inject all the aspects of the character that we know today, would Batman have even made it out of the 40s as a character? Would we even know who he is today if we didn't have the iconic look and the characters to go along with it? Flash forward to the 60s in Marvel, and of course, most famously, Stan Lee gets the credit for creating the Marvel Universe, right? All of the characters, all the concepts, and creating this world, this universe where the heroes interacted, and all of that stuff. And it took place in the real world. It took place in New York, and so on and so forth. However, there's been a lot of debate over the years of who actually created the characters and the storylines, because Jack Kirby, who worked with him on the Fantastic Four and Thor and Hulk, and then Steve Ditko, who did Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, claim that they created a lot of the stuff, that they created Spider-Man and these characters. And I think that gets murky for a couple reasons. First off, the Marvel Studios, Marvel Comics at the time, used what is known as the Marvel Method. So those who aren't familiar with the Marvel Method was the writer, so Stan Lee in this case, would go to the artist and give a idea of what the story is about and a real basic outline, and then let the artist go and draw the book. So he would draw all the panels, draw all the action back and forth, and then the writer would go back and add word bubbles, and the words in the dialogue for the story. So the writer could create a panel that wasn't told in the outline and changes the story in some way. So again, it goes back to the original thing that I'd said about it's a visual medium. So it's visual storytelling through sequential art. So they are telling the story, but that's telling an individual story about the character. Spider-Man, obviously the most famous character in Marvel, and Stan Lee tells the concept, tells the story, told the story so well, so many times that he was watching a spider crawl on the wall, and that's when he came up with this concept of a hero who crawls on the wall and came up with Spider-Man. He also came up with the concept of Peter Parker, who was a nerdy high school kid who had nerdy high school kid problems that ended up shaping the character and who he is. And with great power must also come great responsibility, and all of that all came from Stan. That is Spider-Man. The other part of the story is that originally he did go to Jack Kirby to create the art, but felt that his style was too heroic and too bulky and muscular man kind of art style, and he wanted Peter to be a skinny, nerdy science high school kid. So that's when he went to Steve Ditko, because Steve could draw more slender characters and still have them look good. And yes, Steve Ditko came up with the design of Spider-Man and the costume that covers him from head to toe, which is one of the genius things about Spider-Man. The concept being anyone could be under the costume, anyone could be under the mask, and it allows the character to have a wider appeal to people because anyone can imagine them in that costume that completely covers them, because you can't see who the person is underneath. But that's one aspect of the character. So these people that come and say Stan, oh, he didn't really invent them, it was the artists. I have an issue with that. I can see the argument in the Batman, Bill Finger, Bob Kane argument, but I can't see it in the Spider-Man Steve Ditko Stan Lee argument. Like, coming up with the design, if we're not gonna say Ralph McGuire gets credit for creating Darth Vader, then we can't say Steve Ditko gets credit for creating Spider-Man. Did Steve Ditko shape stories through his artwork, doing the Marvel method? Yes, but the concept, I think, was all set in stone before anything was done in the comics. Maybe I'm wrong, because that's the other thing, is no one was there. And that's one of the things I wanted to say about this confusion, is that the people that are most vocal and out front, who become the celebrity behind the character, are the ones who end up also getting credit in that sense. Stan Lee was the editor in chief, became the editor in chief, became the voice and the face of Marvel for many years. So he's the one who was out front and could tell his story. Famously, Jack Kirby ended up leaving Marvel because he felt he wasn't getting the credit he deserved. Steve Ditko left because of the same reason. He felt like he wasn't getting the credit he deserved. But they didn't really try to find a platform where they could tell their story in a way to say, hey, yeah, I created this, I did that. And again, did they, didn't they? I don't think they did, but we don't know. I think Stan did it, and the artist contributed a lot. That's why we say co-created. But the person who came up with the idea and all of the parts that go around in the story, I think, is the creator. Let's talk about, I don't know what now, last character I want to talk about real quick is Deadpool. And I think he's an interesting one, right? Because the person out front, the celebrity, is Rob Liefeld, who says, I created Deadpool. But from my understanding and everything I've ever read about the character, Deadpool started as a joke in the Marvel offices. He was a parody of Deathstroke from DC. And that's apparent in the name. Deathstroke is Slade Wilson and Deadpool is Wade Wilson. And this is a well-known joke. The thing that it was known, that's why he was created. He was a parody. That wasn't, we're not gonna mince words here and joke and say, oh no, he was actually his own character. No, we know the truth. So it came time to do New Mutants. Fabian, the writer of New Mutants at the time, wanted a villain. They said, oh, let's use Deadpool. Rob Liefeld created the look, and there you go. But when they created the character at first, he was a silent assassin. He was not the character you know today, but they used him here and there. And I remember that time, late 80s, early 90s in the comic industry, and no one was crazy about Deadpool. Deadpool was just a throwaway villain you used once in a while in a mutant comic book, New Mutant or X-Men or whatever. It wasn't until 1997 when Joe Kelly created the first ongoing Deadpool's title. He was the one who created the Deadpool's insane. He's got a split personality. He's tortured by the fact that he can't die, and all the things, the crazy, funny Deadpool that you know today, that Ryan Reynolds brought to life on the big screen. That's Deadpool, right? Joe Kelly created all of that aspect of his personality that people gravitate to today for Deadpool. It's what made him a popular character. But Joe Kelly never gets credit for creating Deadpool. If you're in the know and you've read the comics, you know he's the one that turned the character around and made him something that's funny and cool. Until him, he was just like, again, he was a throwaway villain. No one cared about Deadpool until Joe Kelly did what he did. So what makes a character? Is it the writer who created the character originally? But again, Deadpool was a joke, and Fabian just decided to use him in this story. Felt, yeah, a great artist, and he could draw interesting looking characters, but that there wasn't much there at first. And then another writer came along and created what we know. And that's one of the interesting things about comics, is that it's a collaborative effort, that the character grows over time. How many origin retcons do we have for Superman? How many origin retcons do we have for How many different versions of Green Lantern do we have? How many different versions of the Fantastic Four are there? There are things that are consistent, but there are things that change, and writers contribute to these characters over the years. But there's an argument about, okay, the first time they appeared, this guy wrote it and this guy did the art, so that's who created it. The artist will sit there and go, "Oh, I created them because I drew them," and the writer will be like, "It was my idea. I can't draw, so you did it." So it's an interesting concept, and there are people that are staunchly in the artist created the image, and it's a visual medium, so that's who created it camp. And then there are the people are in the you came up with the idea and you described them and came up with the personality and everything we know about the character, so you created them camp. So I'm curious, those who are watching, what camp are you in? Do you think the writer creates the character or the artist creates the character? And before you answer, I also want you to think about one other thing. It's 2025 and AI is everywhere and it's getting bigger and it's getting scary, quite honestly. But along those lines, we now live in a world where I could come up with a comic book character concept. You could come up with a comic book character concept. You can go into any of these programs, any of these AI programs, and say, create an image of blah, 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 and here's what they look like, and it's going to spit out the character. If you're in the artist who first draws the character is the creator camp, then AI created the character and not you. Think about that. These people who are sitting there, they argue, I'm an artist because I go into AI and I put in a prompt and it spits out an image that I told it to create. Some of them are the same people that are in the camp of the artist who drew the character is the creator. You can't have it both ways. If you believe the artist who drew the character is the creator, then AI is creating all of this art. You're just coming up with an idea, but it's not a character until AI does it. What do you think about that? This is why I'm staunchly in the person who creates the character concept is the creator, but maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? You let me know in those comments down below. Is it the artist? Is it the writer? Is AI creating the characters? Or is it, the artist? I think that's where I'm going to put a pin in it. I will tell you before I go, I am firmly in the writer is the creator camp. Maybe I'm wrong. You let me know. So on that note, as always, thanks for watching. Don't let your cape get caught in the door. See you next time.
If you haven't done so yet, subscribe. It really keeps this podcast alive. Smash the like button if you please. It gives us what we need. Maybe leave a comment or two.